Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome, whether in here or online. This meeting is jointly organized with the Newcomen Society, and we're delighted to share our meeting with them. Our speaker this afternoon is Francisco González Redondo. I hope I pronounced it about right. And he's going to talk about the work of Leonardo Torres Quevedo, pioneer of computing automatics and artificial intelligence in the early part of the 20th century. Francisco, who's an old friend of the Society, has degrees in mathematics from the University of Cantabria, and a doctorate from the UPM, Madrid's Technological University, and a doctorate in philosophy of science, also from UCM, Madrid's Complutense University. And he's an associate professor of the history of science at UCM's Faculty of Education. He was going to be focusing on one of the unrecognized creators of artificial intelligence, obviously the issue of the moment, and invites us to look at the past with an open mind. So, over to you, Francisco.
Ready now? Good afternoon. It's a great honor and a big pleasure to join both societies in this joint meeting in order to talk about Leonardo Torres Quevedo. Yeah, by chance, by a coincidence, happy coincidence, he has the same name as another pioneer in engineering, Leonardo da Vinci. But I think the other one was born in Italy, and this one was born in Spain. And that is going to make a big difference, as you will see very soon. In 2017, I gave this lecture for the Newcomen Society. We were going to celebrate the 100 years of operating of that cable car, which is still operating. It's the first cable car in North America for passengers, but in fact, it was just an evolution of the first cable car for passengers in the world, was again manufactured by Leonardo Torres Quevedo and opened in Spain, in Mount Ulia, in San Sebastian in 1907. I don't say it in Spanish, I let you read it in German, because in the encyclopedias of cable transport say so. The opening, the first cable car in history, was 1907, September 1907, San Sebastian, Madrid. The following year, we should commemorate the 100 years of the centenary of the Royal Air Force. And yes, in fact, what you are watching is the victory of the Allies against the Germans in the First World War. And that was achieved mainly, or at least it took an important part, because we blocked the German U-boats. How was that done? Thanks to the airships. Which airships? Well, the most important airships were trilobated auto-rigid airships designed by Leonardo Torres Quevedo. Yes, fascinating, isn't it? Not for today, because we must go on. My first contact with the Newcomen Society was this article on those issues, the history of aeronautics, in 2011, as a forerunner of lighter than air science and technology. I joined the Airship Heritage Trust, the Airship Association, so you have in their journals many articles on all those issues. Again, evolutions of that, the mooring mast for airships, again, was invented by Leonardo Torres Quevedo, or the top guns, defense against planes on top of the envelope of an airship, again, developed by Leonardo Torres Quevedo. But what happens in 2020? We came out from the pandemic and we had to socialize. And Brian Randall, who is with us, I think, on the other side, Zoom meeting, wrote to me because he wanted an article I had published. And well, in the emails we sent to each other, arose an issue. For me, he was our master. He had written The Origins of Digital Computers, and that great book had several chapters, one devoted to analytical engines. And well, who were the authors quoted? Of course, Babbage and his failures, Ludgate, unknown, and Leonardo Torres Quevedo, 2 works by Leonardo Torres Quevedo. So through Brian Randall, I was asked to write a review for the Annals of the History of Computing on one exhibition I had in northern Spain at King's Castle in San Vicente de la Barquera in Cantabria region. So I wrote it, and you have it here, the whole castle completely full of an exhibition devoted to Leonardo Torres Quevedo's work. And one part of it was devoted to the history of computing. You have 2 of his machines over there. I was not involved in the history of computing by that time. I still was working on other topics. For example, Leonardo Torres Quevedo as the origin, foundational designs, and first manufacturing of the modern catamaran. Indeed, I wasn't involved in those topics, the history of computing, but Brian Randall asked me to do so. So I gathered the team because there was another member of our team, research group, who had, well, defended and presented his PhD on those issues in 1996. Leonardo Torres Quevedo as pioneer of, let's say, computer science. So I gathered the team and I wrote to Brian and I said, okay, Brian, since 1996, I've been working a lot. I've discovered many other parts of Leonardo Torres Quevedo's contribution. So I can tell Alfonso and I can tell my father and master, who was the supervisor of Alfonso's PhD, and write a comprehensive view of Leonardo Torres Quevedo's contribution. And that's what you can read, or you have already read, at the Annals of the History of Computing. I've been working more issues, but I'm not going to talk about it today because we don't have time. For example, about the mechanical part of Leonardo Torres Quevedo's contribution to the history of computing. For example, in mechanism and machine theory, Torres Quevedo's mechanical calculator for second-degree equations with complex coefficients. But as I don't want you to fall asleep at this time of the afternoon, I'm not going to tell you things. I'm going to make questions. For example, can machines think? Because, of course, we cannot talk about these topics without recalling Alan Turing. Okay, and what do we have? Well, we are going to start with an unpublished paper by Alan Turing. Intelligent machinery. We can find it in the internet, you know, the lectures he gave before the National Physical Laboratory, I think is the name of the institution. So he wrote, I propose to investigate the question as to whether it is possible for machinery to show intelligent behavior. It is usually assumed without argument that it is not possible, of course. Common catchphrases such as acting like a machine, purely mechanical behavior reveal this common attitude. It is not difficult to see why such an attitude should have arisen. Some of the reasons are 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, the very limited character of the machinery which has been used until recent times, the 40s, this could be one of the reasons. Well, you know that those notes and published papers were reorganized in the article entitled Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence, which started with that question. Can machines think? And what did Alan say? Well, this should begin with 2 definitions. We should define, first of all, what is a machine, and then we should define what is that a machine could think. And I'm not going to answer to any of those questions because I don't know what a machine is, and I don't know what a machine which would think is. So I'm going to change it into the imitation game. Okay, what happened before Alan was born in 1911? We find an unpublished paper, manuscript paper, Essays on Automatics. And what do we have in this unpublished paper 1 year before Alan was born? Well, many notes in Spanish, which you don't understand, of course, so I translated into English. It is believed that to automate the work of intelligence, it would be necessary to build an intelligent machine. And this is a fundamental error. It would be enough for its builder to be intelligent. Well, 110 years later, I think it's present times. Right, but this is not Leonardo da Vinci. It's not Italian. It's Leonardo Torres Quevedo, who is Spanish. And he transformed, like Alan did, the manuscript into a book. a book called Essays on Automatics. And we find the concept of imitating human actions is going to define automata endowed with discernment. And as you have it in Spanish, you might have some difficulties to understand it. We thank very much Brian Randall for his translation. Brian, thank you very much. So we are going to use his 1973 edition of Torres Quevedo, Essays on Automatics, who wrote, the name automaton is often given to a machine which imitates the appearance and movements of a man or an animal. In general, blah, 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 blah. There is another type of automaton of great interest, those that imitate. Have you heard of the imitation whatever, imitation game? That imitate not the simple gestures, but the thoughtful actions of a man, and which can sometimes replace him. So, and what kind of machines are those? We have it in Spanish, but we have, thanks to Brian Randall, in English. Right. The means of constructing automata endowed with discernment, in his translation, he calls it pattern of behavior, of greater or lesser complexity, should be investigated. Automata will have sense organs, thermometers, magnetic. The information received by each of these mechanisms is generally translated into a movement, displacement of a pointer, or a graduate scale. Now, these automata must have limbs in order to act the operations which they are instructed to do. The control may be exercised by some very simple means. These automata should have the necessary power supplies, of course, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that they must have discernment. Say it in English, right? Moreover, it's essential, being the chief objective of automatics, that the automata be capable of discernment. And what is discernment? That they can, at each moment, take account of the information that they receive, or even information that they have received before and memorize in controlling the required operation. It is necessary that the automata imitate, have you heard the word imitate before? Imitate living beings in regulating their actions according to their inputs and adapt their conduct to changing circumstances. Right, so there is, it seems, from a theoretical point of view, those machines might be possible. And what happened in 1914, when Alan was 1 year and some months old? This is the front page of Le Matin. And if we amplify, we can read at the front page of Le Matin in France, not in Spain, a machine that can do the brain work of a man. In 1914, automata that, imitating living beings, can adapt their behavior according to the circumstances. What is it? Okay, let's recall another pioneer, John von Neumann, because we've heard the word automatics, and his general theory of automata in those same years as Alan Turing was writing what he wrote. Okay, so we have the general and logical theory of automata, very similar to Alan. It comes from a previous version, unpublished document presented in a symposium in September 1948. And later on, it was transformed in 1950, 1951 into this paper, this article. Of course, this paper deals with many subjects. For example, the comparison between computing machines and living organisms. Right. And Torres Quevedo's manuscript in 1911, 1910, 1911, what was it about? It was about automatics. And what he wrote? Well, he wrote manuscript so far, the following sentence. For example, it would be of great interest to construct a body of doctrine, automatics, that will examine and compare all the solutions devised, if any, by that time, that would study from a theoretical point of view the different problems that could arise and that would provide, when possible, general methods to solve them. Yes, but that's only a manuscript. What did he do? Exactly as Alan and John did 40 years later, transforming into a book. And the book is called Essays on Automatics. Its definition, because it's a new science and needs to be defined, theoretical extension of its applications, because he cannot introduce in the book the machines, only the theoretical approach to those machines, right? But you've seen some machines over there? Well, we'll see it later. So what does Leonardo tells, Spanish Leonardo, I mean, tells us? Well, we use again Brian Randall's translation, and we read, one may find very many examples of this kind of abrupt interventions in descriptions of machines, but it is evident that the study of this form of automation does not belong to kinematics. Furthermore, to my knowledge, this topic has never been studied systematically. This study, the essays on automatics, should, I think, be undertaken in a special chapter of the theory of machines, which we call automatics. The means of constructing automata endowed with a pattern of behavior, discernment, of greater or lesser complexity should be investigated. Right. But in those days, another pioneer came up, which was Norbert Wiener with his cybernetics. We've heard in 1914 there was a machine that could do the brain work of man, but we don't know which machine is it so far. Well, anyway, in 1948, Norbert Wiener writes his cybernetics. And he tells us he's been working with a great group of physiologists, neurologists, etc. No? This book represents the outcome of more than a decade of work. And in this book, in fact, we have many, many chapters integrated in what should be a new science, cybernetics. Well, you see all of that, information, language, and society. And an appendix, an annex, the final conclusion. He writes, there is one question which properly belongs to this chapter, though it in no sense represents a culmination of its argument. It is the question whether it is possible to construct a chess playing machine, and whether this sort of ability represents an essential difference between the potentialities of the machine and the mind. Well, I think it is possible to construct a relative truth, but not another, the real problem, to construct a machine which shall offer interesting opposition to a player at some one of the many levels at which human chess players find themselves. Well, in 1948, 1949, 1950, Wiener was very successful, mainly in Europe. And in France, they decided there was a new science, cybernetics. And they made a call for papers, and they said, we are going to celebrate the first International Congress on Cybernetics in Paris, January 1951. So all those people, all the people were asking, wondering about machines, calculating machines, and human mind, human thinking, where have I read something similar to this? Have you read it before? Something similar? Right. Well, Alan Turing was not invited, or at least he did not attend the meeting. But we have many important people invited. For example, Aiken, who talk about Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV. Or, well, for example, Stiefel talking about Flus's contribution, or the National Bureau of Standards, computing machine, etc., etc., etc. And what did the press on those days say? Cyberneticians come up with the strangest questions. Which question? Tomorrow, will the machine be able to think? We read it in French, but we can read it in Italian. International Congress on Cybernetics, the machine and the human brain. So it seems they are all trying to answer the same question. And then what do they do? All right, we have the program. Of course, the first part of it, the mathematical foundations of all this work. Indeed, transformation to Laplace, etc., integration, etc. But what happened on Friday? The third section, Greywater with his turtles, and Norbert Wiener, who was invited. If it's called the first International Congress on Cybernetics, we must invite Norbert Wiener to talk about the computing machine and Gestalt. All right. That is going to happen in the afternoon, like today, from 14 to 15. All right, but what happened in the morning of that same day? Some Spanish person, Gonzalo Torres Quevedo, came up to talk about automatism in the Spanish School of Automatics. And what else more? What happened more? Presentation of Leonardo Torres Quevedo machines. Which machines? Let the press tell us what happened. And what happened is that to illustrate all this, of course, we had Ashby, for example, coming with his machines, and we have Norbert Wiener playing against a machine. What kind of machine? An automatic chess player. There was an automatic chess player in Paris in 1951, brought from Spain. And what happened to Wiener? That he lost. He lost against the machine. It was an end game, king and rook against the king. Norbert Wiener moved the black king, and the machine started working, waiting for his movement. If he tried to commit some, the machine will light a lamp and say, third error, third mistake, I disconnect, so don't waste time, let's play. So he moved his king, and the machine moved the rook or the king, until, of course, the human player was defeated. What did poor Norbert Wiener do? He didn't know there was such a machine. He came and comforted himself, crying with Ashby's, with Gray's turtles. Yes, because the important thing in 1951 was not Norbert Wiener's contribution or the rest of the Congress people. No, the important thing was that there had been a machine, an important machine. A large number of scientists from Europe and America gathered in Paris, electronic scientists, physicists, psychiatrists, physiologists, mathematicians. Among all these illustrious scholars, an exceptional guest, Leonardo Torres Quevedo's automaton, the chess player. Anyone who played against that machine would lose. For example, Cervelli Tartakower, a great master, who was very important, and of course, played and lost. A robot, they call it, that plays and wins. And we can read it. At the Cybernetical Congress, something happened. The machine defeated Tartakower. Yes. Can you read it in Swedish? You can read it in Swedish because it's written in every language. Because in 1951, the surprising thing was not Norbert Wiener's cybernetics. The surprising thing was that there was a Spanish robot that played chess. That's what we could read. Can you read it in English or not? Probably better than me. Robot chess player, the observer, sulks at bad moves. White to mate. Even in Spanish, yes, the robot era, the glory of Leonardo Torres Quevedo at the international exhibition. And what happened to Norbert Wiener? Norbert Wiener had an opportunity. He wrote a second edition of his book in 1961. In the preface, he confessed, I did under some serious handicaps which had the effect of piling up unfortunate typographical errors together with a few errors of content. What do you think that happened? Did he acknowledge Torres Quevedo's machine? No, not at all. He kept silent. He just removed the final chapter, and he didn't even mention what happened in Paris in 1951. But the thing is that we were talking about the second automatic chess player, because the first automatic chess player was presented when Alan Turing was 1 year old in 1913. Yes, in Madrid. And Torres Quevedo knew what he was doing. I say it in English. It would be advisable to systematically study the usual or possible automation procedures constituting a body of doctrine that could be called automatics, which would be of great interest for the construction of machines in general, and very especially calculating machines. And what else can we summarize? Automation can always be carried out, even in those cases in which it is generally believed impossible, because it seems that intelligence must intervene in the determination of the automaton's acts. provided that its operation is perfectly determined for all the circumstances that may arise. The ajedrecista, the chess player, has been created to prove this by means of an example. In Spain, no one acknowledged what had happened. There was not such a body of doctrine, and there were not automaticians. No, there were no cyberneticals. There were not computer specialists. So he brought it to Paris, and that was what you could read, of course. A machine that can do the brain work of man, an automaton that plays chess. Yes, but you have it in French. And I'm afraid you prefer to read it in English, isn't it? Let's read it in English, because Scientific American Supplement in 1915 published a very big article with this title: Torres and his remarkable automatic devices. He would substitute machinery for the human mind. What kind of machinery? Well, you have the chess player, you have the telekine, you have several machines. Yes, of course, this is devoted to theoretical issues and to those machines that prove, that illustrate, exemplify those theoretical issues. You have how the chess player operates, the conditional procedures, the conditional behavior it has, assuming if this happens, then happens. If you do this, the machine answers this, etc., etc., etc. You can follow how the king or the rook moves in, depending on what the human does. But what we call then all this would be the birth of artificial intelligence. Well, then we can come up to our times, and of course, we cannot avoid quoting ChatGPT. Of course, Sam Altman was born 50 years later, after Leonardo Torres Quevedo had died, of course. And why we usually say that the first automatic chess player was prepared in 1912? Because indeed it was almost finished. But I found some letters from Leonardo to his son Gonzalo saying, yeah, the machine is finished, but sometimes it doesn't work well. So I'm not going to present it in public, because if I present it in public and on that occasion it doesn't work well, well, the effect is not going to be good. So I'm not going to prepare it yet. I'm going to show it in 1913 once it is finished. So we asked ChatGPT. All right, ChatGPT. Was el ajedrecista a groundbreaking achievement in the field of artificial intelligence? Can be considered the first machine that exhibited artificial intelligence? That was in 2022, 23. Well, as soon as we could ask ChatGPT. Well, while el ajedrecista was a significant achievement in the development of autonomous machines, it will be blah, 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 blah. In short, while el ajedrecista was a significant achievement in the field of artificial intelligence, it cannot be considered the first machine to exhibit artificial intelligence. Well, so I keep chatting with, because ChatGPT answers about the logic theorist. So I asked him, was the logic theorist a machine or a computer program? Well, the logic theorist was a significant achievement in that. All right. Is there any other machine that can be considered a significant achievement in the field of artificial intelligence between 1912's El Ajedrecista and 1956, the logical theorist? And he says, well, there are several in between 1912 and 1956. 1957? 1956? 1957? 1966? Ah, ChatGPT. What is ChatGPT? Is it an artificial intelligence or a good program, useful program? Well, they tell us what GPT is. So as soon as we understood what ChatGPT was, we wrote an article about ChatGPT and Leonardo Torres Quevedo. You are afraid? You are worried because you suspect I'm going to talk about Torres Quevedo as a forerunner of ChatGPT. Right. That's what we are going to read right now. Not in Spanish, but thanks to Brian Randall's translation, right? So in his essays on automatics, Torres Quevedo recalls all those issues I have previously said. We have to consider, in other words, one may complicate as much as one wishes this pattern of behavior. And this is without the least theoretical difficulty. There is no essential difference between the simplest machine and the most complicated one. Indeed, what is necessary to make complicated deductions from the laws in order to work out the corresponding operations, the machine which executes these operations will appear to be doing the reasoning by itself, and which is usually misjudged as people concerned with this question. For example, Descartes. What happened with Descartes? Descartes said that not even to the divine omnipotence of God, the ability to build automata capable of imitating those human actions which are guided by reasons, it's impossible. He judges it to be metaphysically impossible. E.g., that an automaton can ever use words or other signals to respond sensibly to all that is said in its presence, as even quite dull people can do. All right. Descartes admits that the automaton could speak, but he does not agree that it may speak sensibly. But Torres Quevedo says, imagine a machine similar to the one described in the essays on automatics, in which there are, instead of 3 switches, thousands or millions if necessary. And further that, in place of the 3 or 4 different positions, each of the switches has a position corresponding to each different written character, letters, digits, punctuation marks, etc. It is perfectly comprehensible that one may, by using these switches, write any phrase or give a speech of either long or short duration. This would depend on the number of switches which are utilized. Yes, ChatGPT has to be trained. Of course, it wastes amounts, huge amounts of energy. With the electromechanical technology we are talking about, this would be the solution. What else does Torres Quevedo says? Well, more things in Spanish, let's say it in English. To each speech will then correspond a position of the system and consequently of an electromagnet. We may suppose that this actuates a phonograph on which has been recorded the reply to the question which caused the electromagnet to be activated. We have thus obtained an automaton capable of discussion de omni res civili. Yes. We have trained a model called ChatGPT, which interacts in a conversational way. The dialogue format makes it possible. Yes, the technology 120 years before was not the same. Theoretically speaking, very similar, right? So what are we talking about? Cybernetics or artificial intelligence? In his second edition of his cybernetics, well, Norbert Wiener said, now I believe the time has come to reconsider cybernetics, not merely as a program to be carried out at some period in the future, but as an existing science. And in fact, in Spain, we have a society on cybernetics and automatic calculations. In France, they agree. In Belgium, they will create an association, a society on cybernetics. Here, you had societies on computing. And we had many things. Well, of course, well, we could proceed. The Royal Society, Mathematical Society in Spain supported. And of course, when they were opening the 1953 issue, they were commemorating the centenary of Leonardo Torres Quevedo's birth. So, of course, they devoted this to the forerunner to all those things, cybernetics, automatics, etc. I've heard through Dan Hayton that you are going to visit next year one of the museums we have in Madrid, devoted to José García Santos Mases. And in fact, José García Santos Mases in the 50s, who wrote about all these issues in Spain. And he would say, of course, that the forerunner of all those issues would be Leonardo Torres Quevedo. But the fact is that French working on computing machinery and intelligence, and in English, computing machinery and intelligence, those forerunners and these other forerunners will be removed by young people. Because, as you know, in 1956, at Dartmouth College, there was a call for selected papers, selected people who will meet to introduce a new expression. No automatics, no cybernetics. It will be called from then on artificial intelligence. Who were the leaders of this new field who didn't want to invite, for example, Norbert Wiener? Alan Turing could not be invited because, sadly, he had passed away 2 years before. John McCarthy, Minsky, Rochester, and Shannon. If we put their birth date, we see that Leonardo Torres Quevedo had retired by the time McCarthy was born, or the same happened with Minsky, or, well, Rochester, or Shannon, who was the eldest of all them. No? Norbert Wiener was, well, 10 years old when Torres Quevedo started working on these things, etc., etc., etc. Well, Santes Masses came to the USA, went to the USA, and worked with Aiken. And when Aiken made a call for papers for the International Symposium on the Theory of Switching in 1957, well, someone should talk about switching, the origin of switching in computing machinery. And that's what Jose Garcia Santos Masses would do. He had been working with Aiken in 1952, 1953, spent a sabbatical year with him, and he came back in 1957 to talk about switching research in Spain. And he would recall Leonardo Torres Quevedo essays on automatics. And of course, it is remarkable that when Torres Quevedo proposed his system, he introduced the notion of switching circuits. And for this reason, it is especially appropriate to discuss his work here, now, in that Congress. Indeed, he suggests that variations of those conditions which determine the operation of the automaton can be represented by certain displacement in switches. So what did he do? He wrote a summary of the essays on automatics and the designs of computing machinery, electromechanical computing machinery. Right. So far, what do we have? We've treated, of course, Leonardo Torres Quevedo as pioneer of automatics. We've developed some approach to Leonardo Torres Quevedo as pioneer of artificial intelligence. And what about computing? Let's go through it. As I said, I'm not going to talk about his algebraic machines. Like Leonardo da Vinci, he left unpublished manuscripts. Every machine devoted, blah, 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 blah. You will not understand Spanish, and I'm not going to talk about this. But what Torres Quevedo knew for sure is that Babbage could have not be successful, could not have accomplished success with mechanical theory. With mechanical theory, he could not build his analytical machine. And he tells us all this in manuscript form. But are we talking about Leonardo da Vinci? We are talking about Spanish Leonardo. So he transforms it into a book, and he published a book on algebraic machines. And apart from writing it in Spanish, which is not bad, he sent several papers to the Congrès de l'Académie des Sciences in Paris. An article sur les machines algébriques or sur les machines à calculer. And apart from that, in the late 19th century, at the turn of the century, he published more papers, more articles, and for example, the Revue de Mécanique in 1901, or Revue des Questions Scientifiques in Brussels, 1902. Yes, that's part of what we have presented at this article. You can download it for free. Torres Quevedo, one of the machines he effectively built. Torres Quevedo's mechanical calculator for second-degree equations with complex coefficients. But I'm not going to talk about that. And there are many other things I'm not going to talk about, but you can read because you have it online, available online. We are going to talk about Torres Quevedo's contribution as a pioneer in computing, isn't it? And where should we look for the origin of all this I'm telling you? Airships and remote control. So we go back to the IEEE, which in 2007 created a milestone and gave this milestone. The Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer, milestone in electrical engineering and computing, early developments in remote control. In 1901, the Spanish engineer Leonardo Torres Quevedo began the development of a system which he called telekin, and which was able to do mechanical movements at a distance. the system was a way of testing dirigible balloons of his own creation without risking human lives. In 1902 and 1903, he requested some patents for the system. With the telekin, Torres Quevedo laid down wireless remote control operation principles. The creator of the first complete successful remote control device was not Tesla, 1898, which was a very partial, primitive, not complete remote control device, but Leonardo Torres Quevedo with his telekin. I'm not saying so. It's the IEEE who says so, right? In English, not in Spanish. What's the story? Well, Torres Quevedo came up to solve the problem of flight, aerial navigation, at the turn of the century. There were two systems: von Zeppelin's rigid system, no metal structure, independent hydrogen gas bags inside. It's rigid, it's stable in form, supposedly stable in flight, but in case of any, you hit the structure, the whole structure goes, and well, oxygen and hydrogen mixing, flying bomb. The French had another system. The system was elastic, inflatable, disinflatable. So we could pack it and inflate it and disinflate it. All right. And one of the systems and the other, well, had good things, but many mistakes. And Torres Quevedo applied in France, and then later on in other countries, for a system that avoided all the errors from the Germans or the French and improved all of them. I'm not saying so. It's the French Academy of Science who says so. Appel and many others, well, they wrote, Appel, Sarraud, etc., and report on Torres Quevedo memory concerning a project of dirigible balloon. In short, this solution solves, this project solves the problem of aerial navigation with French, not even Spanish or the rest of the Spanish, and of course, not the Germans. Torres Quevedo's proposal. What happened? Nature, at a certain extent, disagreed. Said, okay, the system from an aeronautical point of view is not bad. The problem is that Severo has just died. Because if we have petroleum engine underneath a hydrogen gas bag, we have a flying bomb. And you are going to commit suicide, like Severo did. A few months later, Baron Bratsky also died. Many people died as pioneers of this means of aerial navigation. But Torres Quevedo didn't give up. And I'm just showing two covers of one book in Spanish, in English, and another one in French. All right, I'm not saying so. It's you who say so. If we were to win the First World War, we must block German submarines. And that has to be done in the Mediterranean Sea with French airships, in the Channel, Western approaches, with airships. Torres Quevedo's airships. All right. But we've seen that Nature and the Aeronautical Journal say, no, you should not make trials with humans on board a flying bomb. And what did Spanish Leonardo do? So we cannot make trials with humans on board? How do we do trials then? With remote control. So that's what he did in 1902. French patent, a few months later, British patent, and the patent in the USA, and the patent in Spain, of course. We can read it. The Monday, December 1902, a system called telekin to remote control mechanical movements. But you know, patents are patents. What do we do with patents? Well, we can do nothing, or we can transform it into an article and send it to the Congrès de l'Académie des Sciences. Go to the Academy of Sciences and present a paper sur le telekin, on the telekin, published in the Congrès. But are we talking about Leonardo da Vinci? No, we are talking about the Spanish Leonardo. So if Leonardo has in his mind a machine, it is because he has the machine in his hand. So he brought not only the paper, but he brought the prototype. And what happened with that prototype? Well, I don't know what happened, but it seems that Revue Scientifique said that something had happened at French Academy of Sciences. Science Illustré, something says Science Illustré. Le Français, Le Matin, the Daily Messenger, the New York Herald, the Daily Messenger. What was the Daily Messenger in English? All right. Okay, in English? Okay. At yesterday's meeting at the French Academy of Sciences, Mr. Appel read a paper describing an interesting invention due to a Spanish engineer, Torres Quevedo, who has already invented a clever calculating machine, which I'm not going to talk about, maybe February 2026. The invention is called the Telekin and was entirely constructed in the laboratories of the Paris Sorbonne. The Telekin is an application of wireless telegraphy by means of which it is possible to guide a vessel at sea from the shore without wires. In the same way, a floating torpedo could be sent below a ship and fired at the opportune moment. This operation has long ago been possible on the condition that the torpedo was conducted with the landing station by means of wires. And now we are talking about something without wires. The New York Herald. It is an application of wireless telegraphy, allowing the steering of boats, airships, and especially torpedoes without presence of a man on board being necessary. Would you like to read it in the Pittsburgh Gazette? The Chicago Journal Tribune? Or maybe in Spanish, well, Tierra Libertad, anarchist, Spanish anarchist journal even, talking about this. Or maybe in La Independence de Roumanie, or in Messaggero in Italy, or La Dépêche Algérienne, North Africa, or Le Soir, or maybe Kölnische Zeitung, or. Yes, every country was waiting if he could steer torpedoes without the aid, without wires, the Spanish Armada could be reborn. Okay, so he asked for the British patent 1 year before, 1 year later. You know, the rules for applying for patents in one country, 1 year after you apply in the first country, you can apply in the second country. But what was the Telekin? It was just remote control. How did it work? We had an emitter of Hertzian waves, radio waves, with a telegraph machine. And so we are going to send through the waves signals. 1 signal, 2 signals, 3 signals. All right, and there's a receiver. The receiver will memorize the number of signals emitted, 1 or 2 or 3. But much further than Tesla, the machine will not act with the first signal sent. It's going to memorize the number of signals. When I send, or in any wireless or TV machine, remote control machine, if you push 1, the machine does something, the television. If you push 2, a different thing, etc. If you just switch on or switch off, you don't have remote control. You are not going to fight with your partner for the use of the machine. For sure, you're not going to fight for that. But if you have a complete remote control device, then you will decide which channel you see. Well, that's the way Telekin operates. It waits until I say intro, enter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the receiver retakes from its artificial memory the number of signals memorized, and it by itself, without human operator intervening, decides which order was implicit in the number of signals sent. 1 to the right, 2 to the left, 3 engine, switch off, switch on, faster, 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 slower, 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 or whatever you want to codify. Right. So, did he prove it? Yes. He made trials with the first electric car, which was remotely controlled in Madrid in 1905. We have it in the journals, the papers. For example, mechanical engineers in Spain gathered in March 1905 to see what happened. And in their journals, they tell us what happened. Leonardo Torres Quevedo said, the car to the right, the car to the left, the car faster. And everything was registered. And he remote controlled a boat, well, 2 boats, one in Madrid and another one in Bilbao. The size of the Telekin, this is the receiver, will be like this table, more or less. So the boat was, well, a big size machine, isn't it? Do you want to see this in English? All right, the Times. Do you like the Times? Okay, you have the Times. For some time past, no, it's not Bernardo, it's Leonardo, but a distinguished Spanish engineer has been, it was made in Madrid at the Frontón de Betty High, and we can visit where Torres Quevedo created all this then. So in your next visit, we will visit this museum we have there. And it was proposed to make official trials, in the interim, tentatives have been made on November the 9th, first public tests were carried out, etc., etc., etc. Yes, this is the origin of Leonardo Torres Quevedo contribution to those all fields. This is from our article, from our paper at the Annals of the History of Computing. The Telekin electromechanical automata endowed with artificial intelligence. Indeed? In what sense? Torres Quevedo from the Telekin to automatics. As soon as Torres Quevedo wrote his paper before the Paris Academy of Sciences, some other said, what is it? What has happened? José Echegaray, our Nobel Prize for Literature, who was a civil engineer, understood that something interesting had happened and tells us about Hertzian waves, how the emitter sends signals, how the receiver memorizes them, and tells us. It is precisely in this interpretation of each command, in the distribution of the orders received, that Mr. Torres' strange invention consists. A material apparatus without intelligence, interpreting as if it were intelligent the instructions that are communicated to it. Is this not admirable? In its simplicity? I think it is, but you might answer. So Leonardo Torres Quevedo was well aware of what he had invented. Indeed, I want to solve a problem, radio control of airships, without risking human lives. All right, but the machine he had invented was much more than that, than just that. So he left, like Alan Turing, not manuscripts, but typewritten papers, unpublished. And what can we read here? These balloons, 1903, sensible to barometric pressure, to magnetic orientation, to Hertzian waves. Well, let's say it in English. These balloons are automata that guide themselves, obeying the orders received. They not only execute mechanical tasks, they substitute intelligent work in operations that seem limited to intelligences. But now, 1903, I just want to remote control airships. We could proceed further in this way, but it is convenient to stop for now because he is shaking. What have I invented? Yes, but by 1909, he gets a letter from France. Maurice Docan, a pioneer in mechanical machinery, nomography, etc., tells Jacob, from the, well, you know, Colonel Jacob, director of the laboratory for the marine spectra, they are preparing an encyclopedia on machines, right? So we are preparing a volume about mechanical calculus, and well, we would like to know if you could send us some information related to your new electromechanical machine. 1909, at the end of 1909. So at the beginning of 1910, Leonardo sends his article, which will be published in a volume in 1911, in a volume which deals with all mechanical calculating machines, arithmetics and algebraic integrators, everything. So we have many chapters, and we come to this part, calculating functions, algebraic machines, Torres Quevedo, but the chapter devoted to analytical machines. What do we have here? Only two things. Charles Babbage's failures and Leonardo Torres Quevedo's method. Right, that's a French book. He's going to improve it. He's going to improve that project of machine, and he published it in Spanish in two journals. In 1911, in the Journal of the Civil Engineers, Revista de Obras Públicas, Public Works Journal, and in Argentina, because he is going to bring his project to an international congress in Spanish-speaking countries in Argentina in May 1910. And it's going to be published in La Ingeniería in 1911. We have the original drawings. Here you have it, full color, like Leonardo da Vinci that leaves many documents beautifully. Yes, but our Leonardo is a little bit more interesting because he publishes. And what is his machine about? You can read it in Spanish, but I'm going to translate it into English again. I have come to the conclusion that it is possible to build an automaton that executes a given series of calculations, however complicated they may be, without the help of an human operator, in such a way that it is enough to enter the data for the automaton to calculate and print, if desired, the results. That's what you have in another paragraph in our article, toward the first electromechanical computer. Because that first electromechanical computer can compute, from a theoretical point of view, several things. That machine, the one published or described in the French book, talks about receivers, operators, and coordinators. And it computes that function. All right, the other machine, the finally constructed, built machine, because this is not Italian, it's Spanish. If he has in his mind the machine, he builds the machine, operates much better, and improves and introduces more possibilities. For example, conditional behavior for the operations. Right, you have it in our paper, so you can read it perfectly and directly. Yes. But do you remember at the beginning of the lecture that we talked about a machine that played chess? The chess playing automaton, the proof of artificial intelligence. Because in his manuscript, towards the essays on automatics, we had many issues. But in his essays on automatics, he is not going to talk about the chess player. No, he's going to talk about other machines. A particular case in automatics, because calculating machines, for Torres Quevedo's conception of that new science called automatics, is just an example. It's just an example, a particular case of automatics, of the general theory of automatics, the easiest one, the simplest one, the calculating machine. That's what he's going to tell us, analytical machines, a particular case in automatics. Let's Brian Randall translate it. In the above, I believe I have shown one can easily conceive for an automaton the theoretical possibility of determining its action at a given moment by reckoning all the circumstances which it should take into consideration for doing the work with which it is charged. The appropriate example for illustrating my explanation is absolutely obvious, the analytical machine. Of course, he's going to write about Charles Babbage's failure. Of course, he's not going to do that just in a published manuscript. He's going to describe why Babbage didn't have success and why with the electromechanical system, he could be successful. You have it here, the designs of Torres Quevedo's analytical machine, 1914. We will devote another article, another chapter, another paragraph to Torres Quevedo's architecture. I didn't want to talk about von Neumann's architecture also, but it's underlined, as you can see. And you have it here. For those who know much better than me what that means, you are dying to go home and download the article and see what's in there, because we describe how this Torres Quevedo's architecture, how would work, how would operate Torres Quevedo's analytical machine, because it's a programmable machine. For example, the automaton shown in figure 15, here, calculates the value of this formula. It only requires one device for the subtraction and another for the multiplication. In addition, 2 memory slots are needed in order to store intermediate data. So on, so on, so on. You can read it easily tonight at home. Yes, but would that remain in the theoretical point of view, or it was finally built? Next paragraph in our article, the electromechanical arithmometer, 1913, 1920. What happened in 1920? In 1820, Thomas de Colmar had produced his mechanical arithmometer, who was, well, commercialized. It was sold. There are many arithmometers, Thomas de Colmar's arithmometers in every museum. But they wanted in Paris to commemorate the centenary of that novelty, that new machine. And so there was a call for papers, and many scientists went to Paris to a meeting, and the proceedings were published in the Bulletin de la Société d'Encouragement. And what did Leonardo Torres Quevedo do? He brought an arithmometer, a mechanical arithmometer. No, an electromechanical one. The technology he had discovered that could be applied to calculating machines with a telekine was applied to a calculating machine called the mechanical arithmometer. Well done, wake up, because you see it in black and white here, but you are going to visit the museum devoted to Torres Quevedo we have in Madrid, and you will see the original one in full color. You have it here. What do we have there? Are you seeing a keyboard? Yeah, I see a keyboard. Do you see a printing machine? Yes, we have a printing machine. And what do we have here? Well, it looks like an old computer we all had, isn't it? Well, what happened in 1990? In France, at the National Museum of Techniques, they organized a big exhibition from the calculating machine built by Pascal to l'ordinateur, the computer. So 350 years of computer science. And if we summarize all the machines they took into account, and we look, yes, I know you don't see it, don't worry, you have it here bigger. So we come from the abacus to the computer, 1990s computer. So what do we have? Of course, Charles Babbage. Did he build that? No. Did he build? Oh, no, of course not. So we have Mark I, and we have ENIAC, great. And in between, what do we have? Only one thing, Torres Quevedo, 1920. So we ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT, do you know the arithmometer electromecánico was an electromechanical computer created by Leonardo Torres Quevedo in 1920? Yes, the arithmometer, also known as the was an electromechanical computer created by Spanish engineer and mathematician used a series of mechanical parts, including gears, levers, and counters to perform calculations. While the arithmometer was not a general purpose computer and was only capable of performing basic arithmetic operation, it was an important precursor. All right, okay. ChatGPT. Do you know Torres Quevedo's analytical machine is described as the complete analytical machine in the 2021 volume of the IE Annals of the History of Computing? I apologize. But as an AI language model, my training data only goes up to 2021. Yes, and I do not have access to the latest publication. And you don't have access if you don't pay, because this is a registered article and you have to be, well, in an academic university or whatever to get into the article. But anyway, Torres Quevedo, blah, 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 blah. Yes. Torres Quevedo provided the designs of the complete analytical machine, the programmable computer, in his essays on automatics. And he started building the complete analytical machine. He proved he could do it with the arithmometer, the electromechanical arithmometer. With that technology, the analytical machine could be built, not with the technology that Babbage had available at that time. With the new technology, it could be done. He started doing it. It took him 10 years at least to build the electromechanical arithmometer. By 1922, he was 70. By 1927, he was 75. In December 1927, he said, I give up. I'm not going to see it finished, because if it took me 10 years, the simple electromechanical arithmometer. Let's see if some disciple can do this. So I'm going to give all my machines to the School of Civil Engineers, where then we are going to visit the machine. And maybe a young civil engineer continues my work. Did that happen? No. Who is going to tell us what happened? Well, Maurice Docan, Figaro, French in French. From Pascal to Torres Quevedo. Of course, we're talking about machines à calculer. The story starts with Pascal, and the story by 1930 ends with Torres Quevedo. We are not in the 40s. We are not in the 50s. We are still in 1930. So what does Maurice Docan tells us? Torres Quevedo got into trying to solve Babbage's problem, but with a new technology, electromechanical technology. Torres Quevedo has found a complete theoretical solution. And in his laboratory, he has reached a partial, with an electromechanical arithmometer, solution to the problem. And he says, should we not concede that Leonardo Torres Quevedo should be considered the most prodigious inventor in those times? Should we? Should we? Well, it was Maurice Docan who made the question. But what is the answer? The answer is in your hands. Thank you very much.
Does it work? Yes. Francisco, that was fabulous. So good. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, questions?
Let's do something here first. Sorry for the delay. Right. That should open up the microphones in the room, I believe. What is it? Tuesday, 1, 2, 3. You're fine. Carry on.
Can we close the screen so we can see the people? Any questions in the room to start with? Dan.
Yes, I just wondered, one of the things that we've members of the Computer Conservation Society have done is to take electromechanical devices and create a simulation of them in modern computing equipment. Has anyone tried that with Leonardo's?
I'm about to cry. Tears are almost start to fall because that has not even attempted. Torres Quevedo's machines are not working. The electromechanical computer, mechanical arithmometer doesn't work. But the chess player, the second chess player, worked until the early 90s. And now it doesn't. Someone knew how to make it operate, but he retired and never told the pupils how to make it work. We have the machines, and I think the Munich Science Technology Museum came to see if they could copy it. I think there is someone from the School of Engineering, of Civil Engineers in Madrid, who is thinking about how to replicate those machines, but replicating it at the same time, making the originals operate would be a good idea. They don't operate, and I don't think anyone has attempted to duplicate or make copies, operational copies of the originals.
Because we, amongst our members, various people have produced sort of laptop version of the Enigma machine where you can change the wheels, change the settings and so on. So that they've created the mechanical logic, mechanical connections in electronic form. No idea how they do it, but the most impressive one was an Elliott computer that, according to people, sounded exactly like the original one because they've got the speaker working and everything. So there's quite a lot of work being done in that area.
The director of the Torres Quevedo Museum in Madrid would be delighted to receive the Computer Conservation Society members, and any help will be very much welcome. And if you have people, specialized in those issues, please tell me their names and let's proceed immediately.
So as many of you know, each year we try to go and visit a computer museum somewhere. Last year it was in Lausanne, a very interesting visit. I think next year we'll certainly be thinking about Madrid. Brian Randall. Can't see you.
Thank you very much for that talk. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, I knew quite a bit about Torres Quevedo already, but I learned a lot more from you. Torres Quevedo is absolutely amazing. And it's clear that not only was he very inventive, but he was very practical. To have built an aerocar which is still operational, to have successfully sold airships to both sides during World War I is another example of great practicality, one might say. The only thing I'd like to add to your talk is a disclaimer. All the English translations there were ones that I arranged to be made. I did not make them myself, but I'm very glad that I did, and very embarrassed how important it seems to the Anglo-Saxons, though I regard myself as Celtic rather than Anglo-Saxon, to have something written in English before they will bother to understand it. It is really very sad and very embarrassing how little still is known in the Western world about people like Torres Quevedo. But let me repeat my thanks. That was a splendid talk.
Brian.
Say something to Brian.
Yeah, please.
Brian, it's the first time I see your face. For me, you are well, what would I say? The origin of all this. Nothing would have existed. This lecture would have not been prepared without your translation and without your email asking for, Francisco, why don't you proceed and go on and leave airships, leave cable cars, and put yourself working on these issues, because the English-speaking people needed, I think, to know about this contribution, a forgotten contribution. And I'm very grateful, because if it wasn't because of you, this would have never happened. I think now every book written on the history of computing must take into account Leonardo Torres Quevedo contribution. And if he or she doesn't do that, I think they will not cover the whole story as it should be done. And that's thanks to you. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Jeremy Gibbons.
Hi, thank you. That was fascinating. I wonder if you buy Torres's claims about being able to do anything, compute anything.
From a theoretical point of view, Torres Quevedo considers that it's, now we say it's just a problem of a computer specialist, engineer, programming, or energy consumed, or whatever, from a theoretical point of view. With electromechanical technology, he could achieve, well, what he could. Now we see that with the technology we have, the knowledge we have ChatGPT and we have many things. And we know that in 10 years' time, ChatGPT will be almost prehistory, and the rest of the programs we have. The speed at which this improves, this develops, makes us to say that what we say today is in artificial intelligence, maybe in 10 years, we will have to change the concept. So I think Torres Quevedo, who wrote all that more than 100 years ago, knew what the technology could do from a theoretical point of view and what could be in practice implemented. And that's what he did. I can prove with an automatic chess player that I can do this. I can prove with the electromechanical arithmometer that I can do this. From a theoretical point of view, many other things could be done. And he, in his book, Essays on Automatics, he talks about that. The theoretical extension of the applications, how far we can reach from a theoretical point of view. But the point, and I think Brian has said before, is that among the pioneers in all these fields, we have people who build machines. And we could say that, yeah, they build machines, but they don't know what they are building. They don't know the theory underlying. We have theorists who write theories about those machines, but they hardly build the machines. In Torres Quevedo, since the late 19th century, we have both things. He has in his mind a new machine, he builds the machine, and he writes the theory that fundaments that gives a theoretical support to those machines, or the opposite. He has in his mind a theory for new machines, which he has in his mind, and he builds those machines to prove that his theoretical approach is correct. That's impressive. That's new. That's not usual in the world of the history of whatever technology we are talking about. And that's why I insist, I'm very grateful to all those who made me say, Francisco, come on, go on and study this and tell the world what happened and what we have forgotten. Because it was written in French, it was written in Spanish, and as you have seen, it was written in English also. Why all this has been forgotten? Because Torres Quevedo came up too early, probably. There was not a community. No one could understand what happened. No one could see the scope which was underlying his contribution. It should be, I think it was very sad for him, and he retired almost retired in 1927 because of that. Not even his son could follow him. His son could help him to build the second chess player. He could help his father building the electromechanical arithmometer, but he could not create anything new. That was only in his mind. He was a genius, but that capability of being a genius cannot be taught, cannot be inherited. Gonzalo had many of Torres Quevedo's genes, all right, but not genius gene. Yeah. That's a very particular capability that his father had, and he was a very good engineer, but he didn't have it.
Thank you.
David Link.
Yes, you talked a lot about Babbage's failure, and my impression is that actually Quevedo and Babbage can be compared. Both successfully built a mechanical mathematical machine, the arithmometer and the difference engine, and both failed at building a universal computer.
As far as I know, the differential machine was built in the late 20th century at the Science Museum, and Charles Babbage didn't build it, only left manuscripts. But as far as I know, that's what I've read.
I mean, that's right. He built the difference engine. He couldn't build the analytical engine. Yeah.
Exactly.
Probably, you know much more than I know. But as far as I know, as far as I read, the curators of the Science Museum were very happy to show in the late 1980s something that they have completed the differences machine, which Charles Babbage could not complete, not even the first machine. But I see some people saying that's correct, some say it's not correct. It's up to you because it's not my field. But I think Charles Babbage could not complete even the differences machine. But that's what, as far as I know.
Menabrea built the analytical engine, including the the mill based on Babbage's drawings?
Well, I know that Ada Byron made additions to the Menabrea's paper. What Menabrea's did was writing a paper, a written paper. But anyway, Brian Randall is with us. He could tell us what he knows about that, because as I tell you, my field is Leonardo Torres Quevedo, not the global history of computing. But I'm almost sure that Charles Babbage didn't even build the first machine, as far as I know.
Ron?
Can I come in on that question of Menabrea? To my knowledge, Menabrea was not at all involved in construction of machines. His Italian claim to fame is that quite a number of years later, he became prime minister. Another claim to fame is that I think it was it his brother or brother-in-law produced a brand of beer which is still available in Italy. But analytical machine, no.
Now you're talking about real genius.
Babbage managed to produce parts of the difference engine demonstrations. There's a theory that he was such an irascible so-and-so that nobody could work with it and finish it. So the Science Museum decided they would build the difference engine for the first time. And I was cameraman on part of the film for constructing the engine. It was an interesting tale because they built the difference engine, but they didn't have enough budget to build the printer. So I forget exactly, number 2 at Google or Microsoft or something said, oh, I'd like one of those for my front room. So they said, right, we'll build you one, but you have to give us enough money to build 2 printers. So the machine you see outside the mathematical gallery in the Science Museum, because it's not a real historical object, it's a newly built machine. They wouldn't let it in the gallery. It has to stand on the balcony outside. Actually, the printer on that was an additional project, which was a spin-off from the copy they made for whoever, I forget who it was. And I think it did spend some time at the Computer History Museum in California.
Yes.
And then was used as a sort of talking point in this guy's dining room or something. That's how the complete engines were built. The other interesting point is that other people were building difference engines at the same time, much smaller, much simpler, and they worked. So Babbage was sort of superseded by the Swedish, I think there was a Swedish difference engine, and various other mathematicians and engineers were building things at the same time.
That's the version of the story I read. It was not completed by him, but in the late 20th century by engineers from the Science Museum.
Somewhere or other, there's a videotape of bits of it being made, but I'm not sure where it is.
I think at the website of the Science Museum, you have everything. You can follow the whole thing, the whole story.
We're diverting. Ryan, did you want to come back? You've got your hand up still.
I believe that Torres Quevedo very fully demonstrated an ability to make a analytical machine, in that his I forget what he called it now. It's one of the machines described in the chapters in my book. Was built as essentially a demonstration of the practicality of Babbage's notion of a analytical machine. He had an electromechanical technology for a memory, for a read-only memory, for control branching and so on, and he demonstrated that that machine could follow a little formula, calculate the formula, and print the result out. This was in fact one of the machines you showed this afternoon. The practicality of a full electromechanical analytical machine is, I think, an issue of need and finance, and the imagination to realize the significance. World War II helped greatly in providing the missing components there.
Sadly, war often does.
Peripheral, but could I just mention Doran Swade's project to provide a simulation of the analytical engine, working on Science Museum holdings of the drawings and notation. And I think he's making considerable progress. But I think that's going to be a simulation in terms of the amount of metal that might be needed to actually implement it.
Doran has written a fascinating book on the subject. He was my predecessor as chairman. We're pushing up against 4 o'clock. Yes, sir. Briefly, please.
Just a quick thing about languages. I think it's right that there can be an Anglo-centric approach, but 100 years ago, people were surely, scientists and scholars were interested in French culture, at least, even if they weren't tuning into what's going on in Spain. And I'm surprised that that is really enough of an explanation for our ignorance of Torres Quevedo. So, I mean, there must be other things going on there to explain. Is it just a kind of a failure of scholars to properly document the history of technology? Is it just that just failed scholars?
It's a mystery because Maurice Docan had a successor in France. And in France, there were pioneers in the 30s. I don't remember the name of him. Well, anyway, and that pioneer was always facing Leonardo Torres Quevedo through Maurice Docan. So Maurice Docan had a disciple who was racing, and at the same time, Maurice Docan didn't worth too much the disciple and was talking even in the 30s about Torres Quevedo's contribution. So that man, whose name I'm not recalling now, didn't want to talk about Torres Quevedo, not even in France. So not even in France, they wanted to recover or keep the memory of Leonardo Torres Quevedo. One of the problems is that Leonardo died in December 1936, at the beginning of our civil war. And that's the right moment when you die to be recalled and remembered. And no one in Spain was ready for doing so. So he died in the worst moment in order to keep his memory alive.
Sad. Thank you.
I'm interested to know, was there any attempt to put any intelligence into the airships? What I mean is, possibly at the minimum, you send signal 1 and the airship turns left. As long as you're sending the signal, then it goes straight. Or could you actually say, fly to a given heading or go to a certain barometric altitude, and you have intelligence on board to achieve that?
Torres Quevedo, as we have seen, wanted to radio control airships. Did he radio control airships? No. He radio controlled cars, he radio controlled boats, but no airships. Why? Among many other reasons, because of weight. The machine weighs a lot, and weight is very, very important. The second point is that you can send a signal, but the enemy can interfere if their machines are more powerful than yours. So a military use of the remote control was not achieved until after the First World War. There was no radio control of torpedoes, there was no radio control in the First World War. So he never radio controlled anything, any apparatus, any device used during the war, not even his airships. But what he had in mind is not just the radio control airship, but it's the drone, the autonomous aerial vehicle. That's what he had in mind. Because if we have compasses, we have barometers, and the machine, the receiver, gets all that information itself, by itself, the automaton can keep height, raise, whatever. We had even in mind, but I could not talk about everything, the autonomous aerial vehicle.
Thank you. very much. That man is a genius. You have rewritten history for us, well, certainly for me. I thought that AI was started in the 1940s, and you wrecked that idea. It was such an interesting lecture. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, our next meeting is on Thursday, March the 20th. Sally Ward, librarian at the University of Cambridge, talking to us about the activities of the ladies of Newnham College who worked at Bletchley Park during the war. There were an amazing number of them, and there were some interesting reasons why that happened. And she and two of her colleagues put together a really interesting exhibition, which Roger and I have both seen, and others may have. So I think that'll be a really interesting talk. I invite you back. See you then. Thank you. Thank you all.
Was born in Italy, and this one was born in Spain. And that is going to make a big difference, as you will see very soon. So we start with the presentation.